Our gospel lesson contains three of the most heartbreaking but realistic words in the New Testament. We had hoped. Notice it doesn't say we still have a glimmer of hope or we believe we can get our hope back. It devastatingly says we had hoped, as if to say our hope is dead, it's history, it's a thing of the past, it's not returning anytime soon. Well, how is that for a post-resurrection Easter story? There is no Christ is risen, he is risen indeed here. Instead, we have two disciples who left Jerusalem on Easter Sunday without an ounce of hope in their hearts. They are exhausted, discouraged, and defeated. Most likely, they've packed up their things and are returning to their hometown of Emmaus. We had hoped, they replied to a stranger on the road, that Jesus was the one who would redeem Israel, but now he is dead, and we are defeated. We had hoped he would start a revolution, but he was handed over to the Romans, who condemned him to death and crucified him. We had hoped the news our sisters shared with us this morning was true, but all we have is an empty tomb, and Jesus is nowhere to be found. We had hoped, but now those hopes are gone, and so we packed up our things and are headed home. This is certainly a sad state of affairs. It's not the post-resurrection story we would like it to be. But before we judge them too quickly, we need to remember that we've stood in their sandals a time or two. We know what it's like to utter those words, we had hoped. We know what it's like to feel exhausted, discouraged, and defeated. We had hoped the degree we earned in college would land us a well-paying job. We had hoped our parents would love us no matter what. We had hoped the doctor would find some kind of pill or procedure that would make us feel better. We had hoped we would be able to retire or heal a broken heart or mend a damaged relationship, but it didn't happen. We had hoped, but now hope is dead. It's history. It's a thing of the past, and we don't believe it's going to return anytime soon. My dear friends, the death of hope is a scary thing for us to experience. But the truth of the matter is, it happens to everyone. People disappoint us all the time. We disappoint others all the time. Because there is not a single person alive who can meet all of our needs and expectations. Life is not one big mountaintop experience where we continue to climb higher and higher and higher. Instead, it's more like a roller coaster with lots of ups and downs, fast turns and loop-de-loops, and we're just trying to hold on for dear life. Now, I'm not trying to bum you out this morning. I'm just speaking the truth, and you know it's the truth. And if Jesus' first disciples had days when they experienced the death of hope, there is no way that we can avoid the same fate. In fact, I take comfort in knowing that the disciples had days of despair, because it means there's nothing wrong with you or me when we find ourselves in the same position. The truth of the matter is, God's people sometimes experience the death of hope. But the good news is that Jesus promises we will not be left there to wallow in self-pity and distress. Think about what happens in our gospel lesson. The first thing we notice is that Jesus meets the two disciples on the road. He doesn't appear to them in Jerusalem. The angel didn't tell them, go to the synagogue and you'll find him there. Jesus was waiting for them at home. Jesus wasn't waiting for them at home, or told them that they'd have to be good little boys and girls before he would appear. Instead, Jesus meets them on the road. He went to their location and appeared right smack in the middle of all the pain and disappointment and hopelessness they felt. Now, I don't think I have to tell you that this is good news, but in case you didn't figure it out, this is good news. Jesus doesn't expect us to go to him. Instead, he promises he will always, always come to us, even when we don't recognize that he is there. And this brings us to the second thing we notice in our gospel lesson. Jesus promises to meet us on the road, but he doesn't promise we will always be able to discern he is there. Ugh. It's the one thing about this story that drives me crazy. Luke simply says their eyes were kept from recognizing him, which is a rather odd way to describe the situation these two disciples found themselves in. The Voices translation is a little more helpful. It says, "But for some reason, they didn't recognize him." The New Life Version says, "Something kept their eyes from seeing who he was." And what I think Luke is trying to tell us is that their sense of hopelessness and despair blinded them from seeing that Jesus was with them. And this observation is huge. It's a sermon unto itself. And the truth it is telling us is that somehow we have to trust that Jesus is with us, even when we can't see, feel, or sense his presence in our lives. And this may very well be the true definition of faith. When, like those first disciples, we find ourselves feeling exhausted, discouraged, and defeated, we need to remind ourselves that we are not alone. We may feel like we're alone, but we are not alone. Jesus is with us, and I believe he will do whatever it takes to make his presence known in our lives. And this is what happens as the gospel story continues. After the two disciples pour their hearts out to someone they think is a complete and total stranger, Jesus gives them a Bible study. His goal was illumination. He hoped they'd see the events of the past week in a new and different light. He hoped they'd finally figure out that Jesus was standing right in front of them. It was a great plan, but it failed epically. These two despairing disciples at least made some kind of connection with the stranger because they invited him to stay at their home in Emmaus for the evening. And Jesus accepts the invitation, although inwardly he's probably chuckling to himself thinking, I can't believe they still don't know it's me. So he devises another plan. And this plan is a complete and total home run. The three of them sit down to share the evening meal, and Jesus takes the bread and he blesses it, he breaks it, and he hands it to them. And I believe it was almost on the tip of his tongue to say, I'll give you one more clue. This is my body given for you. Remember? Remember? But this last-ditch effort was not needed. Luke tells us that finally their eyes were opened and they recognized who the stranger was. It was Jesus. Finally, in the midst of their sadness, in the midst of their dashed hopes and dreams, Jesus found a way to make his presence known in their lives. He met them in word and bread and wine, and it changed their lives forever, ever. Their hearts began to burn within them, which I take to mean that Jesus was refining their hearts. He was burning away the sadness and the despair so that hope could be reborn once again. And in spite of the late hour, these two disciples hightailed it back to Jerusalem and told the others, the Lord is risen. Jesus is alive. We recognized his presence in the breaking of the bread. My dear friends, this is such good news that I can hardly stand it. Every time we find ourselves saying we had hoped, every time we feel exhausted, discouraged, and defeated, Jesus promises to meet us wherever we are and make his presence known in our lives. We don't have to do anything for this to happen. We don't even need to believe that Jesus will be there, because Jesus promises he will be there whether we believe it or not, whether we see his presence or not. He will be there in word and water, bread and wine, and he will keep coming back to us again and again and again until we finally get it, until our hearts begin to burn within us, and we can proclaim the good news that Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. So the next time when we find ourselves uttering those despairing words, we had hoped, let us remember this story and the promises contained within it. Let us remember that Jesus will meet us wherever we are on the road of life, and he will take us on a journey from despair to hope. Amen. And may Christ's blessings be with you this week.